Good evening, CCDA.
Good evening.
Well, it's finally here. First night. This is the big time, fellas. This is like... I was a little surprised that y'all asked me back. I actually grew a beard, so maybe nobody would recognize me when I came here this year. After some of the stuff I said last year, I was like, wow, they actually want me to come back. But CCDA is like a homecoming for many of us. It is for me. It's where we gather with like-minded, like-hearted kindred spirits. We're reminded of the battles that have been fought by the veterans that have gone on before us. I'm just honored to hold the same microphone that John Perkins and Barbara Skinner and Wayne Gordon and Mary Nelson have held, and to be in the same spot where many of these great leaders that have gone and plowed the way ahead for us. We're thankful for them and the work that they have done here for CCDA. So it's a tremendous honor to be able to speak to you on this first night. They gave me the topic, and the topic was called Subversion, Pursuing New Approaches to Activism. Subversion. I have no idea what that means, but that's what I'm going to talk about. Subversion, Pursuing New Approaches to Activism. And it's interesting because I was talking about this with one of my students who's actually from Colombia, and he was telling me that the word subversion in his culture actually means revolution. So our topic tonight is revolution. How do we bring revolution into a world that desperately needs revolution? Because revolutionary change, I want you to know, is already taking place. God is already doing the work of revolution. We just get to come along for the ride for that revolution that God is doing. Changes are needed in the church. Reform and renewal is needed in the church because the world is changing and the culture around us is changing. I'm going to spend a couple of minutes in review from last year. Like a good professor, I need to review the last lecture that I did, which was about a year ago, but let's review anyway. I want to talk about the changes that are occurring in our world. Most of us are familiar with these changes. We can get the slide up there. It talks about how global Christianity has changed very dramatically from a northern and western Christianity to a southern and eastern Christianity. Again, these are things that most of us have already recognized, that we have shifted from a majority of Christians being in Europe and North America. You'll see that in the slide there, where in the year 1900, 83% of the Christians in the world were in Europe and North America, to right now, the majority of the Christians in the world are now in Africa, Asia, and Latin America. And that within our lifetime, by the year 2050, more than 70% of the world, Christians in the world, will be found in Asia, Africa, and Latin America. And I would say the majority of even the Christians in Europe and North America are also going to be non-white, because the fastest growing church in Russia is African. The fastest growing church in Sweden is African. The fastest growing church in London is Nigerian. This is the reality of a global Christianity. Within 1900 to the year 2050, we will have completely flipped the table. We are going from a majority, that is 80 to 85% white Anglo-European Christianity, within our lifetime to 2050, to 80 to 85% of the world's Christian population being African, Asian, and Latin American descent. This is a revolution that is occurring right before our eyes. Now, many of us, this is review, this is old news. We remember these things from books that we've read. Even 10, 15 years ago, people were talking about these changes. And I also want to remind you that these changes that are occurring in global Christianity are also changes that are occurring in American Christianity. American demographics, we already know, are in very drastic change. For example, many are projecting by the year 2050, and now that number has been adjusted, that by the year 2042, the majority of Americans in the United States, the majority of Americans will be non-white. We will have a non-white majority in the United States within most of our lifetimes. Now, that statistic is actually going to happen faster. By the year 2023, we are going to see the majority of children in the United States be non-white. So we're talking about within our lifetime, and you can try to change the laws, you can try to do border patrol. That's not the issue anymore. It's already done. This is already a multi-ethnic nation. This is the new face of America. But now I want to challenge you to say that this is not just the new face of America, this is the new face of American Christianity. If you look at the fastest growing churches and denominations in the United States, they tend to be multi-ethnic. If you look at the fastest declining denominations in the United States, they tend to be monoethnic, predominantly white. If you look at this slide coming up here, you will notice that the Lutheran Church, which is 96% white, is one of the fastest declining denominations. Congregational UCC, 89% white. Episcopalian Anglican, 89% white. Those are the three fastest declining denominations. Then you look at the two denominations that are growing the fastest. Baptists, and this includes all Baptists, Southern, American, Northern Baptist, General Baptist. You'll find that it's very multi-ethnic, and that's one of the fastest growing denominational groups. Pentecostal, certainly, one of the most diverse groups in the United States. That's also now one of the fastest growing denominations in the United States. If we're looking at these denominational trends, we will recognize that American Christianity is not diverse 10 years from now or 20 years from now. American Christianity is diverse right now, this day. What the church looks like needs to look more like those numbers that we saw. Incredible diversity, rather than the mono-ethnic churches that we are so used to seeing in our society right now. Let me give you a couple of challenges on this. Sometime in the spring of this past year, there were two articles that were written. One was written in the Christian Science Monitor, the other was written in Newsweek. And both those articles in national periodicals talked about the decline, the demise, the death of Christianity in America. They were especially talking about evangelicalism's decline, demise, and death. Well, I want to tell you that that's not true. It's not true because if you look at all of evangelicals, not just white evangelicals, all the evangelicals, African American churches, Asian churches, Latino churches, Native churches, multi-ethnic churches. If you look at all the evangelical denominations and evangelical churches, we're not in decline. We're actually growing. And this is a surprise because everybody's focused on these evangelical churches, which is usually defined as white churches, and saying, oh, this is terrible. The evangelical churches are in decline. It's true. It is declining among whites, but it is not declining across the board. Let me show you this statistic. If you, let's go to the next slide there. If you look at this graph bar right here, you'll see three graph charts. The one on the left are evangelical attendance in the last 15, 20 years or so. You'll see that it's relatively flatline. 9.2% of the population going to evangelical churches, down to about 9.1, not a huge difference. In the second column, you'll see mainline churches. These would be the Unitarian churches, the Episcopalian churches, the Lutheran churches. What you'll see that it's gone from 4% of the US population down to 3%. Well, that doesn't sound like much, only 1% drop. But if you look at it proportionally, what we're seeing is 25% of the mainline churches have lost their attendance. So in 15 years, a church that had 100 people now only has 75 people. But you also might remember, if you think about the statistic, that that mainline church is also the most mono-ethnic and the most white. So what we're seeing is the sharp decline of white mainline churches, losing 25% of its population within a very short period of time. However, if you look at the evangelical number, which is flat, or we're maintaining our numbers here, if you were to take out the ethnic and immigrant churches from that number, you would find that we're doing just as bad or poorly as the mainline churches. In other words, without the growth of the immigrant, ethnic, and multi-ethnic churches, American evangelicalism is doing just as badly as the mainline churches, which many are saying are in this complete free fall. We are dealing with an ethnically diverse, multi-ethnic, multicultural reality in the American church. The diversity is not something in the future. The diversity is here right now. But the challenge that I raise, and I want us to talk about a little bit today, is why is it that we still are beholden to a Western white ecclesiology? Why are we captive to Western cultural expressions of the church, to white culture's expressions of the church, when the reality is our world and our nation and our Christian culture has radically changed? And yet here we are operating under this Western white cultural captivity and paradigm.